We will kick things off this morning with a discussion on cybersecurity and deterring emerging threats in AI. Please welcome Dr. Kathleen Fisher, Director of the Information Innovation Office for DARPA. Joining her is Eric Geller, Senior Cybersecurity Reporter at The Messenger.
All right, thank you all for joining us. Good to see everyone here. Before we get started, a few housekeeping things. First, we encourage you to sign up for our newsletter, The Morning Messenger. You can start your day off with everything you need to know about all the news from technology and business to politics and sports. I'm told that there are QR codes scattered around the venue, and I've been assured that they're safe. As a cybersecurity reporter, I'm not going to tell you to just scan any random QR code, but in fact, these are safe, we promise. So if you'd like to sign up, you can scan that and do so. We also hope that you've had a chance to check out the Seed AI exhibit in the back of the room, or we'll be able to do so later. You can play around and create some AI artwork, and we're grateful to them for bringing that to the summit today. And then two final things. First, you probably guessed I was going to say this. Please silence your cell phones. And if you would like to tweet or X about the summit today, you can use the hashtag MessengerAI. Okay, let's get on with the show. Dr. Fisher, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. I want to start with a project that DARPA announced in August, the AI Cyber Challenge. And this is essentially a prize competition to find ways to use AI to locate vulnerabilities in our software before hackers can exploit them. Can you talk a little bit about why that's so important right now as we see AI start to take off in numerous ways?
Yeah, so one of the motivations for the project was Avril Haine's testimony to Congress in February of last year, where she testified that in the event that China were to decide to invade Taiwan, that they would likely carry out destructive cyber attacks against U.S. civilian infrastructure, and that they likely had the capability of carrying out such destructive cyber attacks. So that would mean that in that conflict, it wouldn't be overseas, the conflict would actually be here in the US, and that like what happened with the Colonial Pipeline attack would be just the beginning of how that cyber attack would feel to US civilians. And that's the motivation for why it would be really important to dramatically increase the resiliency of our cyber infrastructure. And our cyber infrastructure runs on tons of open source software, like something like 80 or 90% of our code is in fact open source software. And most of that open source software has vulnerabilities that can be exploited. And so how can we rapidly find and fix those vulnerabilities? AI offers promising technology to be able to do that. Roughly 6 months ago, a paper came out that showed that ChatGPT could find and fix a number of those vulnerabilities. Roughly the same quality, it was roughly equal in ability to bespoke tools that had been written for exactly that purpose. But the most common answer that ChatGPT gave was, I need more information. But the really cool thing about ChatGPT is it talks English, right? It talks human native form. So you could actually have a conversation with it and give it more information. And when you gave it more information, it could then find more vulnerabilities. So that was one of the impetuses for starting this program.
There are, of course, a lot of hype around how we can use AI to improve cybersecurity, but can you just give us maybe a few concrete examples of what you're already seeing the federal government do or look into doing with AI? CISA, for example, is trying to use, that's the cybersecurity agency here in the US, they're trying to use AI to get their arms around all the data that they have about cyber threats and then generate essentially recommendations for how their analysts can act on that information, cutting out a little bit of that work that a human doesn't necessarily have to do. What are some of the other ways maybe that we could see AI help the defenders, not just the attackers?
Yeah, so one of the things that DARPA is doing is, so DARPA's mission is detecting and creating strategic surprise, so looking kind of way over the horizon. And one of the things we're doing is the CASTLE program, which is about using reinforcement learning to actively defend a system while it's being attacked. So the normal thing is when you find a system is being attacked, you take the system down, you disconnect it, you clean it up of the adversary code, and then you put it back up again. The problem is that while you're doing that, your system is not available. So the adversary has basically succeeded in doing a denial of service attack against your system. So the premise of the GUARD system is, can we create a cyber defender that is able to actively defend a system while it's being attacked, that it can respond, that it can predict and know what the attacker might be doing and take active action to defend against that attack. So it can model what the attacker is doing, and it can say, okay, well, the attacker is going to likely pivot to using a particular service and cut off access to that particular service while preserving what the defender needs to be able to do. Like the defender is going to need to be able to continue to, I don't know, use email. So it can continue to protect the email service or whatever that specific system is going to be using. So that's one way we're actively working on using AI to actively defend systems.
And then what about the other side of things, which is AI-powered cyber attacks? I reported recently that experts think AI is going to make phishing just a heck of a lot worse because it's going to be so much easier to write messages that don't have those classic typos that you've all been trained to look for, and it's going to be much harder to find these messages as the propensity for clever messages gets better. What is DARPA seeing when it comes to the ways that AI is helping the adversaries?
Yeah, so I saw a report last week that phishing attacks have gone up by like 1,000% in the last year because of exactly the context that you've seen. So I mean, I think to solve that is going to require a combination of technical work and policy work and education, so that we get even better at not clicking on random links or not following random QR codes. I think that a lot of that's going to require an educational effort. I think the same thing with manipulated media, right? The way of dealing with like AI systems are just going to get really, really good at generating fake images, fake video, fake audio, right? The number of people who have been already subject to fake audio attacks of somebody that they love has been kidnapped and please pay a ransom is really high. So like I think having a conversation with your loved people about like, if you get such a call, have a conversation about like, what did you do? Like, where did you get a summer camp last year or whatever, so that you're not, because when you're terrorized, you don't think clearly. So plan in advance, which is a sad state of affairs that we already have to think about things like that. But so DARPA has the Semaphore program, which is about being able to detect such manipulated media, so advancing the state of the art so that it's a cat and mouse game of the technology to detect and the technology to create, so keeping the technology to detect as far, at close to the frontier or ahead of the frontier as possible, but also having to work with lawmakers and policy people to put in watermarks and so that the people who create that technology can sign it and can sign the watermark so that you know that this is actually authentic, and regulations all at the same time. So I think we're going to need to have a combination of technology people and policy people and regulation and law people and civil society all working together to solve this problem, because there's no easy answer here.
And one of the things that's really interesting about the AI space is you have this really just a handful of companies that are capable of developing these really powerful systems, the most powerful systems. And they're businesses, and so they're not necessarily, we've certainly seen in the history of technology, companies don't always put the public good ahead of profits when it comes to designing very complex systems.
It's not their job.
Not their job. They have responsibilities to their shareholders. Are you confident that this new segment of this relatively new segment of the tech industry is actually going to put the public good first, given the power of these systems, or do we also have to be concerned about that profit motive perhaps crowding out some of the safety concerns in this industry?
I mean, I think you can be sure that every organization is going to operate in that organization's best interest. That's what organizations do. The public sector's job is to operate in the best interest of the public sector. Checks and balances are a super important thing to keep in mind. It's the founding principle of our country. So we need to have the public sector and the private sector work together. DARPA's mission is detecting and creating strategic surprise, and so our job is to make sure that we have technical solutions for policymakers to have at their disposal, so that we have the technical tools for policymakers to have at their disposal to help in that in the policy arena, so they're not blindsided and that they have tools to help in that conversation going forward.
Does the concentration of the industry, though, create any security risks? Because certainly our adversaries know who the major companies are. They're not impenetrable. We've certainly seen examples, including recently in the news, of foreign spy agencies playing the long game in terms of trying to get information from this country. And these are some of the companies that are going to have the most power in determining what the future of this industry looks like. Does that concern you, the concentration of the industry?
The concentration certainly creates risks. In terms of like foreign spying, it also creates opportunity or makes it easier in that we can protect a smaller number of companies more easily than we can protect a larger number of companies in terms of espionage. The technology is also diffusing out of the relatively small number of companies relatively fast, right? We see the frontier models that have capabilities that far outstrip the open source models, but there are like open source models coming out relatively fast that have capabilities that are a year or two behind the frontier models. So it'll be interesting to see what happens as the frontier models continue to advance. How much of a moat is there, which is a really interesting question for those frontier models, given the staggering resources that have been required to create those frontier models.
We are going to take some questions in just a minute, so if you've got questions, start thinking about that. But before we get to that, how do we regulate this space? I mean, DARPA's not a regulator, so you're not the person who's going to be in charge of that, but is the government even capable of getting its arms around all the ways that AI is currently being used, will be used in the next few years, and then methodically going through all those different industries and setting rules for how you can use this? Is that even feasible in the next few years as something that we could see?
Yeah, so DARPA doesn't do regulation, right? That's a government function. I think we see in social media the challenges of regulation. I think bad regulation clearly would be a disaster, but no regulation might also be a disaster. I think it's a place where to regulate well, it requires a partnership between policymakers and lawmakers and civil society and technical people, and we need to get all those different groups talking together. I've definitely been really encouraged by the fact that lawmakers have been spending a lot of time talking to all of those different constituencies and really investing in being informed, right? Senator Schumer arranged for senators to have really deep conversations with policymakers, with technical people and civil society people, and really in closed door sessions where they weren't posturing, but they were actually talking to and getting questions answered. Senators and other other lawmakers went to Stanford and got a deep technical dive. That's just scratching the surface, but I was encouraged by the level of education that lawmakers were willing to spend their very, very precious time. I think that kind of partnership is really necessary to work towards regulation that has a chance of helping rather than hurting.
Okay, I did promise a question and answer period, and I think we've potentially got time for maybe one question. So we do have a microphone runner, so they're going to be coming out in a second. So I guess just raise your hand, and they will come to you. Yeah, right here.
Hey, thanks so much, Eric. Marian Back from Inside AI Policy. So you mentioned the use of ChatGPT for cyber defense, and reading through the extensive executive order on AI, I do believe that there was a call for the government to create their own large language models, I think, for the use of cyber defense. So how has your work positioned you or DARPA or others to meet that executive order instruction, and where are you at with that?
Sure. So I think that was a reference to the AICC challenge, which is coming up. So that's a partnership with OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, and Microsoft. The semifinals will be at Black Hat next August, and the finals will be at Black Hat the year after. And the goal is to use AI and other foundation models to automatically find and fix vulnerabilities in software. And the idea is that those large language models can work at speed and scale to find and fix vulnerabilities basically across massive amounts of open source software. And we're partnering with the Open Source Software Foundation, which is the group that is responsible for blessing patches to open source software to get them in to the open source code, so that we would have a pipeline to really, really quickly find and fix vulnerabilities that could then be distributed across the massive amount of open source software that is used across many infrastructure software across the United States. So the hope is that the companies, the frontier model companies that we're partnering, will be providing access to their frontier models to teams that qualify with sufficiently good technology. So we're not training our own models. We are leveraging the state-of-the-art models and the advances that will be coming just as part of the normal development process to those models from OpenAI, Anthropic, Microsoft, and Google.
I think, unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you so much, Dr. Fisher. This was a great conversation, and please enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you so much.